So it had been a plan by Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization. It was called the Planes Operation. They'd been in the plans for about 3 years, and their plans were to hijack 4 aircraft and use them as weapons by flying them into buildings. Now, when they did this, they had to choose a particular aircraft. The aircraft they chose was a Boeing 757. The reason they chose it was because when Boeing made it, they also made the Boeing 767. So if you could fly one, the cockpit configuration was the same, you could fly the other. Gave them more choices that day. Now, it's not a small plane by any means. 155 foot in length. It could hold 182 passengers. I'll be right back. If I was and I had been given a wing seat, when I looked out my window, this is the length of that wing. Hold your hand up there, right there. That's the end of it. So it's not a small plane by any means. A lot of people think it was also small because of the number of people that were on board. Well, in those days, you could actually have flights take off that weren't full. All 4 flights that day were not full. This one had 33 passengers, 7 crew members for a total of 40, and then it had 4 terrorists. Now, the other planes each had 5 terrorists on board. They were called each cell. And out of these each cells, 1 person was going to be chosen to fly the plane, and the other 4, in the case of the other 3 aircraft, the other 3, in the case of Flight 93, they were called the muscle. Not big by any means, but their job was to control the crew and passengers. Then they had to, the reason they chose the Boeing 757 as well was that it was transcontinental. They could go cross country, so it would be full of fuel. Then they chose aircraft that were going to take off at or around the same time frame and early that morning because they felt there'd be more people at work. Came together for them on September 11th when Flight 11 and Flight 175 out of Boston, 2 Boeing 767s en route to Los Angeles, Flight 77 out of Dulles, a Boeing 757 en route to Los Angeles, and then Flight 93, a Boeing 757 out of Newark, New Jersey, en route to San Francisco. Flight 11 takes off on time, 8 o'clock. Flight 175 takes off on time, 8:14. Flight 77 takes off on time at 8:19. Flight 93 taxis away from the gate at around 8:01, 1 minute late. Should have taken off at around 8:15, but it was delayed. So can the adults here, and bear with me, tell me why Flight 93 was delayed going out of Newark? Remember how bad the weather was that day? No, it wasn't. It was a beautiful day. There wasn't even a cloud in the sky. It was due to Newark being a busy airport. So instead of taking off on time at around 8:15, 8:20, would have fit right in with those 3 other aircraft. It took off at 8:42. And that's really what changed the outcome for that day, that delay, and the crew and passengers on board this plane. It takes off at 8:42. 4 minutes later, Flight 11, it flies into the North Tower. Out of the adults here, anyone watching TV that morning? Remember what we were told?
Small plane crash.
Small plane. Now, when this plane took off, it took off on a heading of 040 out of Newark. And when it takes off out of a 040 magnetic heading, it's paralleling the Hudson off to the right. Out there to the right front of it are your Twin Towers. It climbs up to around 1,000 feet and then begins a slow left-hand turn. Those on the right side of this plane would have looked right out and seen the Twin Towers. 4 minutes later, Flight 11 is flown into the North Tower. And what the gentleman said there is correct. We were told it must have been a small plane flying up and down the Hudson. Maybe the person had a heart attack. I've got an aviation background, and I didn't catch it, but it sure was an awful large hole for such a small plane. We continue to watch TV, though, and we watch at 9:03 as Flight 175. It's been hijacked as well, and it's flown into the South Tower. Now, if you hadn't been watching TV that morning, but if you had, you would have been watching a picture of the North Tower on flames, burning, smoke billowing out of it. Then all of a sudden, out of the corner of your right side, you saw this plane come swooshing in. And now our nation knows that we're under attack. We're not really quite sure what to do. We haven't really had a contingency for this. We haven't had anything like this happen before. I mean, we've had airplanes hijacked, but they've normally just been taken back to an airport. They make demands. Sometimes some are kind of met. But in either case, most people ended up able to get off the aircraft alive. Occasionally people were killed, but nothing like what was going to happen this day. Flight 93, meanwhile, it's climbed up to flight level 350. It's about ready to enter into Ohio. That's 35,000 feet. And it's told to contact Cleveland Center, the last normal radio call. It's around 9:26. And it's Cleveland Center, United 93, flight level 350. Roger, United 93. And then 2 minutes later, Cleveland Center hears a Mayday call, and literally. And Mayday is an international call for distress. If you say Mayday in Russia, China, Japan, doesn't matter where. People are going to know. They hear it on a radio wave, they know that you're having an emergency. And that's what they hear. They hear a Mayday, Mayday, get out of here, get out of here. But there's a lot more distress in the voice. They don't know who made the radio call, though. On the radar screens, they got a position for each of their aircraft under their control, and underneath that, an altitude readout, but it doesn't illuminate when the person talks. However, one thing does occur, and one of the aircraft under their control begins to lose altitude. 30 seconds pass, and then it comes again. That same call from that same aircraft. Mayday, get out of here, get out of here. Weaker now, though. Somehow the struggle's been going on the entire time, these past 30 seconds, but somehow the terrorists have breached this cockpit door, and they've taken the captain, Jason Dahl, out of the left seat, and his first officer, Leroy Homer, out of the right. And now one of the terrorists is flying this plane. They pushed the crew and passengers to the back, and from there, they began making phone calls. Still too high to use their cell phones, but the earphones on the back of the seats. From that, they find out about the North Tower being struck at 8:42, and the South Tower being struck at 8:46, at 9:03, 8:46 and 9:03. And then at 9:37, they find out about Flight 77, the plane out of Dulles. Well, it's been hijacked as well, and it's been flown into the Pentagon. They've been told by the terrorists, they've got a bomb on board, we're going back to the airport, everybody just keep sitting down, don't do anything else. And they realize that they're not going back to an airport. They realize that they're probably going to be flown into a building. And in a short 29 minutes, these strangers, by and large, start moving up this narrow cockpit aisle, which is from the back of the plane about where that black wall is. The cockpit door is about where the edge of the concrete is, right behind you there, right there where that grass is. They start moving up that narrow cockpit aisle, and we know that by some phone calls that were made by the crew and passengers. One of them is a flight attendant, Sandy Bradshaw, 38 years old, 5'2" tall. She's been flying for 11 years. She's brought her schedule down now to about twice a month to take care of her toddlers. Her husband, Phil, is a pilot for U.S. Airways. She's told him they've been boiling water to throw on the terrorists. But now, at 9:57, she's telling him, they're getting ready to move up to the cockpit. I've got to go. And she puts the phone down. The terrorists realizing it as well. Later on, the cockpit voice recorder, which is recovered from this site, shows that their voices, or shows them talking about crashing this plane. They realize that their threat of a bomb is no longer keeping them at bay. And now they began banking this aircraft hard to the left and then hard to the right. When they hijacked the plane, the terrorist flying it, he's flying it via the autopilot, via the mode control panel. He's putting in heading, he's putting in rates of descent, and he descends this aircraft down to about 5,000 feet. He's picked up a heading of 120. That's taken him to Washington, D.C. Later on, the 9/11 Commission believes most likely their target was the Capitol building. And now, at around 5,000 feet, this terrorist pilot begins banking the aircraft hard to the left and hard to the right, over 30 times in a 2-minute period. You can hear one of the passengers saying, into the cockpit, if we don't, we'll die. And then the terrorist begins diving it down in a series of porpoise maneuvers, up and down. You can hear glass crashing in the background, most likely from the service cart. And he climbs up to around 10,000 feet. He's about a mile from impact now. Then he begins to dive, slowly at first, and then rapidly it begins to increase. That feeling you get, anyone here ever flown before? That feeling you get when the pilot begins his descent, you feel it, and then it stops, settles out. Well, this isn't settling out. Till with about 15 seconds from impact, here, about 2 miles over that hill, Flight 93, the terrorist puts it into a 30-degree bank, then that goes to 60, and then 90. Now the left wing is pointing straight up, and the right wing is pointing straight down, but it can't fly like that. So now it begins to roll over onto its back. And then that dive that is coming in, that begins to increase. It's now 25, 28, 32, 36, till with about 2 seconds from impact, if you looked up over that hill, you would have seen Flight 93 coming in at a 40-degree angle, 563 miles an hour. These trees here they form a 90 degree. So you can imagine about half of that to give you an idea how steep it was. The impact's in the field out here on the other side of this black wall, up against those evergreens, those hemlocks. There's a large boulder that's been placed there to mark the impact site. There's a large explosion from the jet fuel that's remaining. That's from that first picture. You were probably rushed through. Maybe not all of you had a chance to see it. But that first panel out there shows a large black cloud. That picture was taken 1.5 miles from the impact site over that hill. So you can imagine how large that black cloud is, that heat plume associated with it, and a large portion of Flight 93 is brought up into the air. And unlike today, predominantly the winds are from the north, northwest, and they were about 10 to 12 knots, and it pushes everything in this direction. And that's why here, where this black wall is, and where this fence runs, this area still remains enclosed today. The FBI came out here because they knew they had the best chance of gathering evidence. This is Tuesday. On Thursday, they find the flight data recorder 15 feet deep in that hole, and on the following day, they find the cockpit voice recorder at 25 feet. Now, both of these items are stored in what is considered to be the most crash-worthy part of the plane, the tail of this 155-foot long plane. Now, when the FBI, and they gathered a lot more evidence from here, they gathered identification of the terrorists, enough to tie them together in the money trail. When they were finished on September 24th, 2001, a short 13 days after Flight 93 crashed here, they turned it over to the coroner. Well, in the meantime, he had been gathering evidence as well, remains. He gathered less than 10%, but from that, he was able to identify everybody via DNA and certain other methods. When he's done, he steps away. But his job isn't complete, because as he was only able to gather approximately 10% of the remains, he considers this whole area here and that impact site their final resting place. And so he goes ahead. What the FBI had done with that impact site, well, they'd made it about 85 foot wide and about 40 foot deep. He fills it back in, covers it with some topsoil, some grass seed, some wildflower, and the family members are grateful. He steps away, and then a fence is placed around this entire area, roughly 8 acres. Security is posted, and then people start coming to pay their respects. Temporary memorials spring up off-site. They're brought here, consolidated, about halfway up that hill. And then on September 24, 2002, a short year to the date of when the FBI had completed their investigation here, Congress, seeing what is occurring here. You got neighboring residents coming here, answering questions to all the people that are coming here to pay their respects. They make this a national memorial. And then that begins the process and brings you to what you see here today. On September 10th, 2011, this site here was open to the public. The dedication occurred out there at that white wall. That white wall, we call it our wall of names. On it are inscribed the names of the crew and passengers. When you get out there, you'll see it. But the other significance of it is that it marks the flight path. Flight 93 comes over that hill, across that white marble wall, and then impacts out there in the field where we have that boulder. This black wall here was put in place to look like coal because this whole area here had been strip mined from that wood line all the way out to Route 30. That allowed Flight 93 to penetrate the earth because it wasn't totally compacted. This visitor shelter, you look at it, it looks like wood. It's really rubber mold of hemlock planks and beams. The significance being the aircraft impacting in front of that hemlock row and about 100 of the trees having to be removed. Up on top of the hill, there'll be a visitor center. That should be completed by 2015. There'll be a walkway that'll follow those rows of trees that you saw there. In reality, those are groves of trees, 40 groves for the 40 crew and passengers. There'll be a return road that'll take you out to the entrance quicker because this road coming down, it is all part of the memorial. Out near the entrance, there'll be a 93-foot tower for Flight 93 and then 40 wind chimes for the 40 crew and passengers. There's a lot of things that I've learned since I've been here. You know, I've looked up quotes on courage, and one of them going back to Sandy Bradshaw. She's also talking to the maintenance supervisor right after this hijacking. She describes to him exactly everything that's occurred, all details. Later on, he talks about their conversation and how shockingly calm she was. And so when I look at that, you know, courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's being able to act in spite of it. So this memorial commemorates a tragedy, but much more than that. It commemorates the strength and courage of the crew and passengers of Flight 93. And as I said before, I'm glad that I see you here because that's a good story. That's a story that needs to be told. So I'll leave you with one last thought. The strength that you have in these moments of adversity, that comes from the deep love that somebody else has for you. The courage, well, you get that from the deep love that you have for somebody else. Now that's something to strive for. Not necessarily always obtainable, but something to strive for. When the crew and passengers got on board the flight that day, they had no idea what was in store for them. But I think you'll agree with me, once you learn a little bit more about them, they performed admirably. I want to thank you for coming here to Flight 93, and if you got any questions, I'll be around later. Thank you.